Okay, so let's look at how we're going to approach each question. So, unsurprisingly, we start with question one. And this is where it'll really guide our reading, because if we look at question one, we know we need to read about source A and we need to read the beginning of source A. So we're looking at lines 1 to 21. That's all quite a bit of reading here. All the way down, and I might mark it off 1 to 21. And I know that I don't need to go past there. Generally, these statements are in sort of chronological order, which means that we can prove or disprove each statement as we read. So we're choosing 4 statements which are true. Okay, so if the statement is correct, that is when we're going to colour in this box. That's when we're going to shade the boxes. So we want a maximum of 4 statements, no more, no less. In order to keep things neat, for me, I find it easier to put things to start by making notes on the left-hand side. So I'm not shading the boxes till I know I've got my 4 statements. So let's have read through the statements. A. Aberfan was a well-known place in Wales. B. The village did not have a chapel or a pub. C. Pit waste had been building up for at least 100 years. D. Village life centred around the coal pit. E. Mining was a new and thriving industry. F. Life for miners and their families was tough. G. There wasn't much good news in Aberfan. H. The men lived long and healthy lives. Okay, so I know the statement, I'm going to look at the statement, and then I'm going to start reading. So the first statement is, Aberfan is a well-known place in Wales. Few people had ever heard of Aberfan until disaster struck it. Okay, so few means not many. So not many people have heard of Aberfan, so it's not well known. So I'm going to put a cross next to that. The village did not have a chapel or a pub. It was just another of the small mining villages lying tucked away in South Wales valleys, a huddle of anonymous terrace houses of uniform ugliness, unrelieved except for a chapel and a pub. So except for a chapel and a pub. So there is a chapel and a pub. The village did not have, I need to make sure I'm reading carefully, didn't have a chapel or a pub. I know it did have a chapel and a pub. Pit waste had been building up for at least 100 years. Its heart was the coal pit, and its environment, like the others, the debris of a slowly exhausting industry, a disused canal, some decaying rail tracks, and a river black as a stick. A general coating of grime over roofs and gardens, and the hills above blistered with a century of mining waste. Okay, so a century is 100 years. Okay, so I know that. So at least 100 years, I'm going to say yes, that's correct, because it's a century of mining waste. Village life centred around the coal pit. I think I've already read something with that. Its heart was the coal pit. So if we describe something as the heart of the community, then that means village life centred around it. So I'm going to give a tick there. Mining was a new and thriving industry. So here I've highlighted earlier disused canal, decaying rail track. So if something's not being used, if it's decaying and dying, then it's not thriving, because to thrive means that it's doing really well. So it's an old and decaying industry. It's the opposite of new and thriving. Life for miners and their families was tough. Such villagers learned to accept a twilight world where most of the menfolk worked down the pit. Many died early with their lungs full of coal dust, and the life was traditionally grim and perilous. So that sounds pretty tough to me. Lungs full of coal dust and an early death. I'm going to say yes, it is pretty tough. There wasn't much good news in Aberfan. Disaster, in fact, was about the only news that ever came out of the valleys. The sudden explosion underground, miners entombed alive, or the silent death in the dark from gas. So that's all bad news, isn't it? There's no good news there. So I'm going to say yes to that one. The men live long and healthy lives. Well, I already know that's not true because they died early. We've talked about lungs full of coal dust. Okay, so I've done my crosses. 1, 2, 3, 4, C, D, F, G. Now I'm going to shade the boxes. And that just makes sure that I'm not getting confused, okay? Because I've checked there. If I had more than 4 sentences, I'd read again. If I had less than 4 sentences that I ticked, I'd read again. Okay, you want to make sure that you've got your 4 marks there.